Hey folks, it's time to talk Generation 6 heroes. And it seems the Kingshot developers continue to make the skills more complex, and you'll see exactly why with at least one of Triton's abilities. But these videos have been getting quite long as a result, so starting with this generation, I'm taking your feedback and breaking this up into 3 videos, one for each hero. This one's on Triton, but you can see the other videos for Sophia and Yang in the same Heroes review playlist, linked below in the description. Also, special thanks to Frack of the Frackinator website for once again doing an insane amount of testing of all of these crazy under-the-hood mechanics that Kingshot is throwing at us. So let's dive in. For the stats, we again have a 20% increase in each combat stat from generation to generation for the respective hero type. And again, we have a roughly 22% increase to expedition stats. This is roughly the same percentage increase we saw going from Generation 4 to Generation 5. It is less than the percentage increase we saw going from Generation 3 to Generation 4, however, due to the compounding effect of all of these increases, Generation 6 still brings with it the largest increase in stats in absolute terms in the game. This is now true for both Conquest and Expedition modes. Now if we start with Conquest, Triton's Conquest design feels like a bit of a mismatch to me. I can see where the developers are going with this, but it suffers from a fatal flaw. So let me go through these skills quickly and I'll show you what I mean. Tidewill gives him a 2-second period of invulnerability, which is great for a frontliner. And it does some nice area of effect damage at the end, but it is a low multiplier capping out at 140% damage. Then we get to Regal Wrath, which increases both his attack and defense, the attack by up to 24% and the defense by up to 48%, for 4 seconds when it's cast. Again, it's pretty straightforward except for the timing. From the animation, it looks like this is cast roughly 8 seconds into the match, which gives it about a 50% uptime after that initial delay. This also means it does not time with his first cast of Tidewill, which is both good and bad. Good in that he isn't wasting a defense buff during an invulnerable period, but bad that his AoE doesn't get the benefit of the attack bonus. Then we have his striking hit ability. Now his striking hit ability is interesting in that it does up to 28% damage to a random enemy with every normal attack. This can put some pressure on the backline, but it lacks the impact and consistency to neutralize any backline threats fully. And then finally, his widget comes with Magnetic Reformation, which gives a flat bonus increase to damage. Now, we need to be careful here because the combat formula for Conquest and Arena has never been shown, so we don't know if this bonus is to damage dealt or to damage received after enemy defenses apply, or if there's even any distinction between those two concepts in the formula. Unfortunately, there's also no way to test this since damage numbers are never shown in the game. But either way, it is yet another damage boost for Triton, which gets me back to my initial statement. The developers clearly want him to be some sort of damage-dealing melee hero, which is certainly a classic archetype in RPG games. But the fatal flaw is that the stats and Kingshot combat mechanics aren't really set up to make this role successful. First issue is that there's no real relationship between risk and reward for damage dealers in Kingshot Arena. You don't get any additional damage for closing the gap to a target to deal damage versus just shooting them from afar, and infantry do not even get a combat bonus over cavalry in Conquest or Arena. So you get no inherent compensation for the risk of putting a damage dealer on the front line, which means as a developer, if you want to make this work, you would need to adjust the stats to make the role successful. And by the way, this is why Amadeus was a successful melee damage dealer. He had an extremely high stat advantage early in the game, but even then he was still performing better on the backline. However, Triton's stats are simply a 20% increase over the previous generation's hero. So all of these attack and damage boosting moves don't really help him because his stats aren't configured to receive it appropriately. And for context, his base attack stat is only slightly higher than Generation 4's cavalry hero Margot, and she makes better use of it with an amazing area of effect move. Now it's not all bad news for Triton, since he still has the highest health and defense in the game during Generation 6, which means he'll still find his way into top arena teams. But since his moves are based on complementing his weakest stat instead of his strongest one, I suspect he'll drop off quickly as we move to later generation infantry tank heroes. Now if you're the sort of player who can afford to max out red gear on Triton, then you'll probably be able to make use of his damage dealing. But that's sort of a win more function and not an inherent strength of the character design himself. Anyway, enough about Conquest, let's talk about Expedition. But first, a special thanks to my Sloth Squad channel members for their continued support that helps make my work possible. Check out the links below for how to sign up as well as how you can use your in-game spend to support my channel. On the expedition side, we have a unique differentiator with his priority expedition skill, Command of Power. This is a simple 25% increase to defense, but it is actually the first time such a rally joiner ability has appeared in the game. Previously, we only had heroes like Hilda, or Saul, which provides some defense split with another stat, Gordon, who gives 25% health, or the other purple heroes that only give that inferior 20% stat boost. With what we now know about the damage formula, it's best to maximize the stat distribution across hero skill codes, and this gives us a new way to do it for rally composition. If it's unclear why this is helpful, then check out my Combat Myths video linked below in the description where I go into it in much more detail. Now, Warfare of Power sounds like an amazing ability for our viewers who actually do know about the combat formula, and that's because this is a new skill damage up skill code, which means it should be multiplicative. And the skill caps off at 30%. This means it is a significantly larger impact on the typical baseline of 25% improvement to all troop stats per skill. However, there is a major drawback with this skill. While we've been able to confirm that it does indeed work multiplicatively with other hero skills, it does not actually affect them all. That's right, unlike other skill codes in the past, this one doesn't modify the total damage, but rather individually modifies the specific skills of specific heroes. And from what we've been able to tell, it does not work on what I'll call the passive abilities like Chenko's 25% lethality bonus. Instead, it only seems to work on what I'll call active abilities like Quinn's precision shot. And the best way I can describe the difference is skills that show up as being damage dealing skills that get credited with troop kills in the battle report. So as you can see, that's sometimes not a lot of them. As you can imagine, this really undercuts the potential of the skill quite significantly and sort of makes it a red herring for people who know a bit about the Kingshot combat mechanics, but haven't actually done the testing under the hood of this particular skill. But the reality is that it sort of turns Triton into a hero that relies on the synergy of other heroes in your composition. And when it comes to rally joiners, they are frequently sent with these 25% passive abilities anyway, so his rally impact is diminished a bit from the skill. And again, I'm afraid I have more bad news with Oath of Power. It increases the health of all units, yes, but importantly, it only increases the health of cavalry and archer units by 30%, and these are the two unit types that need the stat the least. Infantry, meanwhile, only get a 20% improvement. This is even worse when you consider that infantry make up the majority of most formations. And whenever they don't, like in Bear Hunt, you usually don't take damage anyway. And this is before considering the different base values for each troop type on which these bonuses are applied. I would have much more preferred just a simple flat 25% improvement to all units' health here, and I think that would actually have been even more valuable. But instead, this takes the stat gain away from precisely the troops that would get the most benefit from it, and places it on those that get it the least. Now, in fairness, if you build out his Title Scepter, it does provide stats to some additional infantry health to offset this. 22.5% more versus a maxed out Generation 5 infantry widget on Long Fei. But remember, these stats are additive, not multiplicative like the 5% health lost for the infantry from that hero skill. And speaking of Title Scepter, his widget ability is yet another defensive infantry widget, this time improving defense by up to 15%. And like all widget expedition abilities, this is a special bonus which impacts your stats multiplicatively. And yes, for those of you keeping track, this is the now 5th consecutive generation of infantry hero with a defensive widget. And even crazier, the next generation infantry hero Charles also has yet another defensive widget. So the developers are really squeezing everything they can out of Amadeus in Generation 1. But let's get back to the point of this video. After hearing all of this, should you get Triton? And I suspect even after all of this, he will still be a necessary pickup if you want to keep your defensive formation at its most competitive in Generation 6. Whether you're using 60-40 or other formations, they all have a high share of infantry, and therefore the jump in stats from the last generation will do enough to offset an okay moveset. The unique Joiner ability may also give him some long-term utility for reinforcing other Joiner formations too, and this may keep some degree of relevance for him as he eventually becomes outclassed by future generations, but not as much as it would be if it were an offensive ability that could be used in Bear Hunt. I think it's a little too early to say if he'll be outclassed by Charles in Generation 7 since it's only just now releasing. Preliminarily, I think Charles may also have some issues given that his first two abilities are capped at 20%. Initial testing seems to suggest that Charles's 110% improvement on infantry stats offsets the ability weaknesses, but it's still a bit early to be conclusive. But the thing is, Triton's potentially biggest skill seems to be designed in such a way that his effectiveness relies on synergizing with other heroes' abilities, while Charles and Long Fei are a bit more effective in a standalone context. So if you're on the free-to-play or the low-spend side of the game, then you can probably safely pass on Triton. You likely would have just finished building Long Fei from last generation's Hero Roulette Wheel, and he plays a similar role. Meanwhile, the likelihood of you needing to be responsible for holding a defensive garrison is low anyway if you're not spending. And as far as Conquest goes, I generally recommend against using Conquest as the primary reason to select heroes since there's just so little reward for it in-game. But that said, all three of these heroes will find their place in the top teams during the Generation 6 arena. And you can expect to see a lot of Triton in the front line with Long Fei, and then Sophia, plus Yang in the back row along with one of Rude or Vivian. But overall, my sense is that Triton is actually the worst positioned of the three Generation 6 heroes to have longevity in the top arena teams in future generations. But you should take that somewhat with a grain of salt given there is so little community knowledge about the under-the-hood workings of Conquest battle formulas and mechanics. In any case, I hope the Triton review has been helpful to you. Be sure to check out the rest of the Hero Reviews playlist for the other heroes in this generation, plus other generations, and be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay up to date with the latest hero analysis and other guides as I publish them. Thanks again for watching, and happy gaming out there.